Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of What's on Your Workbench. And before I get started, I wanted to remind you that if you have any questions, there's a Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen. So just put your questions in there and we will try to get to all of them today. It is with great pleasure that I am introducing Nell Corkin. Nell is an amazing artist who does the most amazing work and I think some of the most detailed things that are even humanly possible. And we are visiting her workspace today, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her work and about what she's working on at the moment. But first I wanted to ask Nell, what's your first memory of miniatures?
My very first memory of miniatures is making a dollhouse out of a shoebox when I was about 5. But before that, and I remember it now that I've seen, I took a photograph to remind me. My mother made my sister and me an amazing dollhouse out of cardboard boxes when I was 3 years old. And it was fully decorated and full of the plastic furniture that was around at that time. The rugs, if I remember correctly, were terry cloth towels. And there's a picture of it. The wallpaper was gift wrapping. And I think some of the curtains were hankies. It was instant love at first sight for me, obviously. A few years later, she gave us, for my sister and me, for Christmas, the dollhouse that her father had made for her in the 1920s. It was made out of orange crates, and in many ways was very loving hands at home. But they had visited England when she was 8 or so, and so it was full of lovely wood furniture from England that typical dollhouses of the 1950s in this country did not have. And because her dad was an engineer, he had put electric lights in it. Granted, they were porcelain sockets with Christmas tree bulbs, but there were still lights. And my sister and I, over the years, redecorated it many, many times and made new things to put in the dollhouse. And it was obviously the start of something.
I've seen a lot of dollhouses. That's the most intricately decorated shoebox dollhouse I've ever seen. Now,
well, my mother was an artist in her way too. She liked to do crewel embroidery, but she was also very handy.
Yeah. Now, when you were growing up, you didn't think, I'm going to grow up and be a miniature artist.
No.
What was your path?
Well, for a long time as a girl, I thought I'd be an architect, actually. But my family was very against this. They wanted me to grow up to be a lady, and ladies did not do that. And ladies did not go on construction sites with all those men. And so gradually I gave up on the whole architect thing. I thought about art school, but again, my family was not totally in favor of that. They didn't say no, but you know, somehow got the idea that if I was going to be Michelangelo or something, I'd already be doing great art. I wouldn't need to go to art school. I just have all. So anyway, I wound up being an art history major in college. And I did enjoy it, I have to say. But I missed working with my hands. And I'd get all wistful when I walked past the art department and could see through the windows that there were people in there making things. In the long run, it was probably just as well because there was no art department on earth that taught miniatures. You know, and I actually found out when I went to work in the movies that every good miniaturist I know is self-taught because you had no choice. And a lot of the creativity in miniatures is figuring out how to do things, you know, that nobody has done before. And that certainly you have never done before. And it's part of that, the challenge of that. It's one of the things that keeps me interested.
You really, like, in miniatures, but just in your life, you had to forge your own path, because you went from art history to appraisal work, and then what happened?
Well, I'd done a number of things. I worked in retail for a while as a fashion buyer, but all the sort of artsy kinds of things. And as you say, I worked at Sotheby's for a while in Los Angeles, and I worked as a fine art and personal property appraiser in Los Angeles. And as you might imagine, saw some fairly amazing houses. But during the time I was an appraiser, I saw what I think was the first program ever about the making of something and showing the model makers, and it was about Star Wars. And I'm sitting there watching it with a bunch of friends who were mostly screenwriters, and they're going, "Oh, I wish I'd written that," you know. And I'm just going, "You can do that for a living?" You know. So I got a friend of mine who was an art director to get me a job interview. And he had told me they don't hire girls, which is not a good thing to tell me, because that is exactly what I am going to do if they tell me girls don't do that. So I just walked into the interview and decided I wasn't going to leave until they hired me. And it turned out he was somewhat wrong. They did hire some girls, and the rest is history. And I did that for about 10 years. And it was fun. You know, at the time I started doing it, I thought, well, I'll just do this for a couple of years, and I'll learn all these wonderful secrets of making miniatures, and then I'll go off and I'll make miniatures. Mm-hmm. But it's sort of like the people who go to fairyland. You're having such a wonderful time that it just passes and you don't realize it.
Yeah.
So in a way, it was lucky for me that computer imaging started coming in, and there was less and less work. And eventually I wound up in New York and doing other things, and started making, well, when I was in the movies, I made my first 144 scale miniature, which I think you have a picture of. It's a little blue house, little resin house that the Barbara Lou Cumero had made. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's nice. And I kept it on my workbench. And sometimes when everybody else went to lunch, I'd stay there during lunch hour and work on it. It would be the next one, I think. Well, nope. Oh, that's me in the movies. We can go back to that. But I still have it. It's one of only 2 things of mine that I still have. And it was fun to do, but as I was doing it, I thought, well, I could probably do something more detailed than this. Mm-hmm. And it did have an inside, you know, not a picture, but an inside. So I tried N-scale model railroad buildings, because they're very close to 144. They're a little tiny bit smaller, but not so much that it makes much difference. And I did a few of those, and a friend of mine took them to Philadelphia, to the Philadelphia Miniature Show, and sold all of them. So I thought, well, this is good. Mm-hmm. But I learned very quickly that I didn't want to, they call it kit bashing, take a kit and change it. It was just easier to start and make my own house from scratch. So I started.
I'm going to jump to some pictures that show you working. And what set is this?
Oh, that is me with my 1980s hair, planting flowers in front of a house that we built for She Devil, which was a Roseanne Barr movie. Mm-hmm. Need I say more? Yeah. And at one point in the movie, she leaves her husband and blows up her house.
And that's what's
so we built this house too. There it is, blowing up. People ask me sometimes, how could you stand to make things that were going to get blown up? But the only answer to that is that's what they were supposed to do. We were waiting to blow them up. Uh-huh. This was not a museum exhibit.
That's amazing. I'm looking at the little meter on the side of the house and thinking, you know, even in something that's going to be blown up, every detail is there that you would need to see.
Yeah, we were matching a real house that was in the movie. They used a real house. Mm-hmm. And it had to match it exactly so they could cut from one to the other and you wouldn't notice any difference. Mm-hmm. And we did lots and lots of things like that, which is one reason now I don't copy buildings very much. I prefer to design my own building because in terms of copying things, I know I can do it. The thrill is kind of gone. It was a fun part of my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to go to the little nut house next, if that's okay.
Sure.
Yeah, let me get there. Sorry, I'm clicking through, but we've got lots of great pictures here. There we go.
Yeah, go two more to the front of the house. Yeah, do a tour. Yeah, this was walnuts had always called out to me to be houses. There's just something about them. One of my friends in the model shop used to say, "Oh, Nell, everything's a little house to you," which is kind of true, actually. But this is actually one of the two things that Barbara bought from me, first bought from me. And it's a real walnut, and the roofs over the window and door are actually acorns. And most of what you see is natural except for the grass and the green stuff, which is model railroad landscaping. I don't use dried flowers and so forth because I want the nut house to look the same 20 years from now that it does now. And dried flowers and so forth will change color and fall apart. So everything else, though, the rocks and the little bits of bark and so forth, the slate at the bottom of the steps is really slate. But yeah, if you want to turn it, you can see the inside. All my houses have insides, and my early nut houses have sleeping lofts. This one has a sleeping loft with the ladder going up there. The ones I have done lately do not have a sleeping loft, although they have a shelf over the door, and then there is a bed downstairs. And maybe that's because I'm an old lady and I wouldn't want to have to climb up to a sleeping loft.
Did you go right from the model railroads did you start in with the nut houses after that?
Yeah, it was, but it was not too far into my let's make 144 scale career. And actually the very first one I made, I still have. Because just after I finished it, my mother came to visit. And I knew she'd like it because she was all about fairies and things like that. And after she went home, when we had our weekly phone call, she would say, "You haven't sold my nut house yet, have you?" So I gave it to her for her birthday because I knew orders when I heard orders. And as a result, I still have it. Because when she passed away.
Yeah. And she had a lot of influence over you and your can-do spirit, your belief in being able to do things, right?
Yeah, that she was that kind of a person too.
Yeah.
In a 1950s traditional woman sort of a way. She definitely was. And she had been to college. She was a French major, and during the war, she worked for a company as a translator. And I think probably would have gone on to do that more had she not, gotten married and did all the things that women were supposed to do then. But interestingly, my dad was a lawyer and later a judge, and he had pretty much zero interest in working with his hands. He didn't have the typical dad workshop with the typical dad tools. The person who did that stuff in my family was my mother. And so I think that had an influence too, Not that she had a workshop, she didn't. But she was the one who, made the cardboard dollhouse and would work on craft projects with me and definitely encouraged that in both me and my sister, I would say. Yeah. If we want to do something, just go out there and do it. Which is very important. As I said, model makers are largely self-taught. And we all have that same attitude wherever it comes from.
It always seems to me that it's about the process as much as it is about the finished piece.
Yeah, it's about the process. I mean, that's why artists keep doing it. I mean, when I finish something, it's always the best thing I've ever done. I love it to death. But then it's time to find it a home and go on to the next challenge. Which is also why I don't make very many of anything. You know, the thing I'm working on now is the second like that, and that's probably it. And it will be a little different from the one I made before, because that's what keeps it interesting.
Could we talk about the baby houses that you've done?
Sure.
Let me pull up a couple of pictures here. And for those of you that are watching at home, please bear with me while I work this PowerPoint and try to share the screen. Hopefully that helped.
Number 8.
To go where I need it to go. There we go. There we go.
There we go.
So this is one in the museum's collection.
This is something, baby house. I had a sort of list when I started out of things I wanted to try, and baby houses were definitely one of them. However, I wanted a really fancy cabinet, and I am not a person who would make a fancy cabinet like that. But I found someone that I thought would go with my style really well, and that is Gilbert, who's a miniaturist who lives in California. And we got our heads together and designed something that would work. And we've made about, I think, 4 in this size ever. And then some that are 3 rooms instead of 8. And these are inspired by the Dutch baby houses that most miniature collectors are familiar with. Something that I've always found interesting about them is they're made in cabinets, so that when you close the door, it could just be a nice cabinet in the room, which not only protected things inside it, but it's also made it look a little more normal in case your visitors were not really understanding. And we're talking, the early 1700s for some of these, really understanding of why you would have this little cabinet full of rooms. Although I have to say, most people, even if they're not familiar with miniatures, when they see them, are very taken with them. But anyway, so Gilbert does the cabinet and makes the interior so that it comes out, so that I don't have to worry about damaging the cabinet while I'm waving my paintbrushes and glue around. And I work on just the rectangular interior all by itself, and then fasten it into the cabinet when I was done.
I was wondering how you did that. And I know this is inspired by those Dutch baby cabinets, but you really have to be an interior designer. I mean, you
yes.
design decisions, which must take a lot of research in order to get the right feeling for it.
Yeah, that's where the art history comes in kind of handy. Several of these rooms, the rooms in this house, are directly inspired by some 2 or 3 different Dutch baby houses. But I changed them a little bit. But yeah, one thing with 1/44 scale is that you see the whole thing at once. You don't walk over to it like it's just one room. You just see the whole thing at once. So it has to be harmonious in terms of design. So if you have, for example, a whole lot of wildly different colors, it just looks messy.
Yeah.
And noisy. And so I try to use colors that would blend with each other.
And I'm sure you have to find things that aren't oversaturated. Things have to be look the right. They can't be the exact color that something would be in the full scale world. They have to be brought back a little bit.
Yes, that's exactly right, because the small scale intensifies the colors.
Yeah.
And it's really surprising when I'm mixing a color. Sometimes I think I'll have it just right, and when I put it on the wall, it's way too dark. And I have to keep lightening it. So yes, you're quite right about that. And another thing is, I tend to avoid primary colors for pretty much the same reason. Also because the place in real life where you see things that are that small are in the distance, and distance tends to soften colors as well. So it helps to sell the reality of the piece if you keep the colors muted.
I'm gonna go to the next picture. This is the picture that we had taken in the museum with the big high-powered camera. And then here's blown up that center hall. And I have always appreciated this piece, but until I saw the blow up of the interior, I just, you know, my admiration just grew, because oftentimes work at this scale, when you start to magnify it, when you start to blow it up, it starts to look less and less real. And this is, you know, so still so realistic, and everything is still so crisp and perfect. And I don't even have a question about that. I'm just in awe and amazed by it.
Well, I am meticulous. I will admit to being meticulous.
I mean, that marble is incredible. The faux marble is amazing. The veining is.
You wouldn't believe how easy it is to do faux marble in 1/44 scale. I teach it all the time, and people are amazed at what they can do.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of a couple of colors of paint and some water, and wiggle the brush a little.
Yeah.
Because the beauty of marble is there's so many kinds of marble that anything you do will look like some kind of marble or other.
Yeah. How about,
so that's just a question. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, that's okay. How about the plates there on the left, in the on the shelves there?
Oh yeah. Those are 1/4-inch people do this too. Those are 1/8 inch hole punch. They're paper.
Oh.
And I coat the paper with clear gloss acrylic paint. Let it three coats usually, and let it dry. And then I punch them out with my hole punch. And then I shape them with a nail set. Not a nail set. And there you go, plate.
Amazing.
Again, that's something that I sort of invented years ago. I know somebody else has invented it too for other scales. It works surprisingly well with small scale plates. Some of the other things in there are metal castings and so forth.
I'm going to go to the, sorry, I'm going to pop over here. Here's another little baby house that we have in the collection. That is really more child's dollhouse, it seems to me, than baby house. So this is really, you know, a replica, or not even a replica, but a representation of something a child would play with rather than an adult.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it was based on a couple of actual Victorian dollhouses, including that slightly strange roof, which just charmed me. I don't know. And that and the nut house were the first two things that Barbara bought from me.
Oh. And then this one is the Queensland baby house. So this is actually a replica of a real one, correct?
Yes, it is. Yeah, I changed the name to protect the innocent. But... I don't do too many front opening dollhouses because I worry about warpage. Although as the years have gone by, there's been surprisingly little of that, thank heavens.
Yeah.
The doors and the body of the house are made of birch plywood that's 1/32 of an inch thick.
Wow.
So you do need to reinforce it here and there to prevent it from warping.
And I took it out yesterday to photograph it, and it's just, it's so wonderful to handle, and the doors work just beautifully.
You notice I carefully avoided having to make a staircase by sticking it in the middle, and you can sort of see it through the doors and the rows. Okay.
And what does your sister call the doll houses without staircases?
Fly-up houses.
Fly-up houses. You have to depend on your little girl to fly you up to the second.
Right.
And then this one is just so lovely. But gives us, you've paired it with a doll, a figure, and so it gives us sort of context to it. Yeah,
which is something I like to do. I've done quite a few with a doll involved. And it also helps to date it, you know, by her Regency attire. And this is another Gilbert Mainland cabinet, by the way, that I sort of poached from him. I saw him at a show, and there was this cabinet, and I thought, oh my gosh, would that make a nice baby house?
Uh-huh.
So I took it home.
Yeah. With your, there's a couple of pictures here. These that we've been looking at have all been in the museum's collection. And then there are a couple here that were so tiny and so hard to get a good picture of, but these are little room boxes, kind of like the Thorn rooms, just little room settings that would have fit into a wall.
Yeah. And I didn't do room boxes for a long time because I thought they'd be too dark. And it's funny how you don't think of things when you're in the midst. And then finally one day I thought to myself, oh, for heaven's sakes, no, make the top open.
Yeah.
It's not complicated. Yeah. So there you go. That's what the tops look like.
That's ingenious. Yeah. Yeah. And so this is the front view of it. And here's the top view of it here.
It is a little complicated to do, but it's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had at least one customer who's actually set them into the walls of a room box.
Oh.
So they were like the Thorn rooms in that way.
Yeah. Neat. You said something to me about that you're not creating miniature architecture.
Right.
You're creating
miniature dollhouses. Yeah. Yeah. It's a little different, hence the fly-up dollhouses and no stairs and no bathrooms. There's a lot of real dollhouses are like that. Not to say I never do that, but I usually don't. I guess I would say. And part of that is just I'd rather make something that I feel like making. And making a zillion bathrooms, I don't find very fascinating. So. And the same thing with staircases. They're very time consuming and they would add to the cost of the house when it's finished. But if there's a compelling reason to have a staircase, I put in a staircase. But yeah, I mean, I could do architectural models, but it isn't what I do. If you look at that, the Vermeer House that I did, now that's for a representation of a sort of real house that Vermeer, of course, either made up out of whole cloth or embellished it as he wished. As I found out when I tried to duplicate it. If I'd done it exactly as it is in the painting, it would have looked very strange indeed. That's, let me see.
I've lost it. There it is. There it is.
There it is. There it is.
So tell us.
Which is a lot more realistic. Sorry.
For those who are not familiar with this painting, could you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, this is the house from Vermeer's painting called Little Street in Delft. And it's a picture of a house which would have been more than 100 years old in his time. And I just had a client who wanted something different. So he said, could you do that? And I thought, sure, why not? Artistry major, no problem. So I suddenly had to find out what would have been behind that facade. And so I launched into quite a research project. I've used it since to make a couple of more Dutch houses, but this is the only one that's the Vermeer House. And his studio is on the first floor, which would have probably been the case. He could receive customers and so forth in the front of the house, and then the kitchen is in the back of the house. I didn't make it quite as deep as a real one would have been because this is a dollhouse. That would have been kind of ridiculous. It would have been like that long. And my model is like that. So less than 6 inches.
So this house, does this one have an interior?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that was a little complicated to do too, because I didn't want to just leave it open. So the roof is hinged at about the midpoint and lifts up, and the side drops down, and you can see the interior.
Oh, neat. Another thing that, I mean, in addition to art history and architectural styles, there's a lot of things that you bring into that I think are neat. We have a little miniature dome, Christmas tree dome, and it's as if someone is working on the Christmas tree. There's a picture here of the your representation of the phenomenon of the she shed. So there's the Midsummer Cottage, from the, you know, inspired by the Midsummer Murder. So there's a lot of inspiration here, and I love that you just take it wherever you feel like going with it.
I love that too. That's what makes it fun for me, you know. And I jump from thing to thing. I'm very inconsistent, you know. I'll do a baby house and then I'll do a nut house, and then I'll do a Georgian townhouse, and then I'll do a she shed, because it keeps the juices flowing, you know. It keeps me feeling creative, and always brings up little new problems to solve. And the problem solving aspect of it is one of the things I really enjoy, figuring out how to do things. You know, when I first started doing this, I promised myself that the best I could do was to build these cute little houses and fill them full of beads and things. I was going to stop. And this is another example of something I like to do, is tell a little story. And I was really egged on by a customer to do this, and we sort of conspired via Facebook Messenger. And actually found a photograph of a pug and a cat who looked more or less like that. And I've done any number of pieces with a cat getting in big trouble in the dollhouse, because that's something from real life.
Yeah.
But this is my first cahoots piece with a cat and a dog. And the cat and dog are by Carrie Paiuti, who is just brilliant. That's the only word for Carrie. And it's a nice big Georgian townhouse, but obviously things are not going well for the dollhouse. We had to pick a small breed of dog so that he'd actually fit.
Yeah. And their expressions are perfect. The cat's on the upper floor in disdain, and the dog is causing all sorts of trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that there are a lot of things that you figured out. You have a lot of like proprietary formulas and things that you have discovered over the course of your career. Is there something that really stands out to you that is like your proudest accomplishment, or the problem solving and the invention of it?
Well, I would have to say the Pargeter buildings are quite a triumph.
Find those.
We'll find it. It's there.
Maybe I will.
Pargeting, for people who don't know, is a kind of plasterwork decoration that became popular in England during the reign of Henry VIII. He built a brand new palace called Nonsuch Palace, and it was covered with decorative plasterwork to the extent of full figures. And so the king did it, so of course then everybody wanted to do it, and it was the way to update your tired old half timber house. So it would go right on top of existing half timber. And I've always been fascinated by it. There is a village in England called Saffron Walden, which some friends of mine very kindly took me to in 2015. That is full of examples of Pargeter buildings. And I really, really, really wanted to do it in my scale. And it took me 10 years to figure out how to do it.
Oh.
So I'm not teaching that tomorrow. I'm hogging it all for myself, but I'll have to tell somebody someday. So,
Yeah.
But anyway, they're so imaginative. And it's in a way it's folk art, but of course some folk artists are better than other folk artists. And so it ranges, Pargeting ranges from sort of geometric designs, which are also very nice, to something really extravagant like this. And it was partly a matter of the taste of the homeowner and partly a matter of the skill of the person doing it. And they still practice it in England today.
Wow.
To the extent that Pargeter became a last name, you might have heard of Edith Pargeter, who wrote the Brother Cadfael books. That's where they come from.
Yeah. Wow. I think, I'm trying to think if I went past the MidSummer House. Is that the MidSummer House right there?
There it is. There it is.
Yeah. And I just have such a love for this because I'm a big fan of the Midsummer Murders and have watched all 22 seasons multiple times. And this is pretty amazing.
Yeah, this was a result of my binging Midsummer Murders. And it isn't any specific house from the show, but it is in the vein of any number of houses that you might see in Midsummer or Badger's Drifter, any of those places that are in the show. And it has been unquestionably my most popular house.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent that I finally said last year, I'm never going to make another Midsummer Cottage. And well, you know, the next thing I knew, I was making another one because I like making it. But the colors change, the windows change, the interior changes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's all right. And I have taught it as a class at the Guild School too.
People was wondering about the arrangement of tulips on the table in the main lower room of the large baby house, what they're made out of. And I think, you know, all of the flora and fauna is just amazing. I'll go back to that so that people can see it. I think it's the next slide.
The landscaping is definitely one of my things. And even when I was working in special effects, I was in the shop full of guys. And except for my boss, who was good at it, most of them were terrible at landscaping. So guess who got to do the landscaping? So I had a lot of practice. But that was all right because I liked it. Those particular flowers are the only ones I've ever done in exactly that way. They are 5,000 thick brass etched pieces. And I actually cut them out of decorations on an N scale gate.
I'm sorry, say that.
Rather than have them made, one of the things I use quite a lot of are N scale etched brass components from England. Mm-hmm. And they make you know, windows and gates and fences and doorways, things like that. Mm-hmm. And there is this one very elaborate gate that they have, that up in one little tiny corner of the elaborate gate are these tulips.
Oh my God.
And I had this wonderful brass vase that a friend of mine had made and given to me. And I thought, oh yes, that's what I want to put on that table. So I sat there for a couple of days actually fiddling around with those tulips and cutting them out and painting them and arranging them one at a time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the dimensionality, but that's how I make them.
Amazing.
It's fun to do those things.
Nancy would like to know how long it takes you to make like a room setting.
I knew that was coming. There's one question I get constantly. It's how long does it take you to make a house? And I have a true but smart alecky answer. And then I have the actual answer. And the true but smart alecky answer is 74 years. Because like every artist, my whole life experience goes into whatever I'm working at the moment. But the not so smart alecky answer, a room box, for example, like the two that you were showing, takes me about 5 days usually. Honestly, it's been so long since I've done this one, I don't remember, but it might have taken a week or two. It varies a lot. If it's something I've done before, it goes a little faster. But in the case of this baby house, that stairway, for example, in front of the door, it required quite a lot more engineering than you might think to make it work out, and to have it land at a place where a person who was the right scale could actually turn around and walk down the remainder of the steps. I'm always very careful about that. Because although these things don't literally exist in real life, I like them to look as though they could. Mm-hmm.
Somebody could move right in.
Yeah,
Um, Janine, hello, Janine. I would like to know, do you personally collect miniatures? And if so, what's your favorite thing? What's your treasure?
Okay. Yes, I do. Sometimes I trade with other artists. We do that. Sometimes, especially when somebody's starting out, if I can afford to buy something from them and I really like it, I always do, because I remember how much it meant to me. I collect a lot of dolls because I will never ever make a doll in my whole life, but I really admire dolls. But of all the things I have, the thing I would probably grab if my house was on fire is a unicorn that was made by Curie Beauty.
Oh.
It is the most stunning thing you have ever seen, and it's a unicorn. It's not a horse with a horn stuck on its head. It's a unicorn. It has a lion's beard and has a goat's tail and it has cloven hooves, and it's absolutely gorgeous.
Uh-huh.
And I have it next to my desk in my office where I can look at it all the time. And grab it if the house is on fire.
I think we're gonna I'd like to show some pictures of what you're working on currently.
Sure.
So let me fast forward through there's the little Christmas scene that I was talking about. And we'll just click through here until we get to that. There's the interior.
Yeah, you notice there's a dollhouse in the back corner of the parlor on the first floor on the right.
Oh my goodness, I see it. I hope you all can see it at home. That's amazing.
And that would be 1 to 1,728 scale.
You're blowing my mind.
It's not furnished.
There's the Vermeer House, and we did have a question from Kathy about how you did the Vermeer interior. So did you do a lot of research? What was that like?
Oh boy, did I do research. And I wasn't coming up with a whole lot, and I wasn't sure how I was ever going to do the whole interior and make it look right, other than take a field trip to Holland, which was sort of not in the budget. But I did find an amazing book by an artist with illustrations by said artist of what life was like in Holland at the time that house would have been around. And it had floor plans, it had elevations, it had all kinds of pictures of interiors, and it literally saved my life on that project. A great deal of the interior of that house is from that, and some of it is from paintings by other Dutch artists and Vermeer. There's a bed from a De Hoek painting, for example, things like that. The artist studio in the front is from, part of it is from The Astronomer by Vermeer. So a combination of things, but that book is just the greatest. And if anybody is ever wanting to make a Dutch house, please email me and I'll give you the book title so you can get your very own copy. It's a beautiful book all by itself.
That's great. Artists are some of the best researchers on the face of the planet. They have to ferret out some of the most incredible details.
Yeah.
Here is
it's fun doing that. You know, it's where the art history degree comes in handy.
Yeah. So here's some of the tools that you use, and do you want to talk a little bit about these?
Yeah, people might be interested to know I do not have a shop full of machine tools. I largely work by hand. I do have a very, very nice saw, well, a couple of very nice saws, circular saws, one with a larger blade than the other, and I have a variable speed disc sander, which is a very useful thing. I have a milling machine that I use occasionally, but not very often, and a shaper table. Other than that, I work mostly by hand. And I have some pet tools, and this is one of them. And a lot of people, when they see this, people know about this. It's not an exotic tool. It's called the chopper. And it was made for the model railroad people, bless them. And it has a razor blade mounted on that handle with a red end. And it's just for making cuts in very thin materials. It's not reliable for anything over 1/16 of an inch. But for the kind of things that I do, like putting half timbers on the outside of MidSummer Cottage, where I have to cut a whole lot of them to the same length, it's just invaluable. It comes with stops, but they're kind of thick. So as you can see there, I make my own little stop that is thinner and makes it easier for me to see. And what I do is I add that ruler so that the 3 is right under the blade. And that way I can see the 1/32 inch increment. So if I know I need a piece that's, say, 7/32, I can just stick it in there, move it to the 7, cut it, boom, I have 7/32. It saves a whole lot of time. And the only thing with a chopper is you have to remember to change the blades a lot because the wood is very hard on. It's also good for cutting styrene or anything pretty thin. I wouldn't use it for metal. But I would be lost without it, and I always have it right here at my right hand so I can grab it and put it down.
And then here we have some tools that are part of the magic.
Yeah, for things that the chopper won't chop that are still pretty small, like moldings. It's not too good for moldings because it tends to break the ends of molding. I have this lovely little miter box and a very thin, very fine tooth saw for Micromark. And as you can see, it has angles set in it, the ones that you normally use. And it has a little stop, and that's what I use for that sort of thing. The next thing down, and these are my new pride and joy. These are called sprue cutting tweezers. They're made for cutting parts off of trees full of parts, the kind of trees you get with a plastic model, where you have this thing and all the little pieces are on it. They're connected by little straight lines of plastic, and that's called sprue, the connecting piece. And what these do, they're like tweezers with a nipper on the end, a flush cutting nipper. So what you can do, if you go to I think the next slide for just a sec. Nope, the next one. Nope, the next one. Just keep going, I'll stop you. Well, ooh. Let me see, I'll find it. Okay, there we go, that's it, and there they are. One thing I do for windows is I use N-scale model railroad windows, but they don't always look the way I want them to. So in the ones I'm doing for this house, for example, if you look, you can see on the left there, that's what they look like when they're on the tree. And they have the kind of muntins muntins are the crossbars that you would see in in any 18th century house. But I wanted something that looked more European. And you see lots of European windows like the ones on the green pad. So I have to cut out the muntins. And before I discovered these little gems, I would cut them out with a knife or what was supposedly a flush cutter, and there'd be a little nub every place I cut one off. And I'd have to sit there with a filing off all those nubs, which is not only time consuming, but it's very easy, especially when you're working with a plastic part, to cut off too much. And then you have to say a bad word and throw it in the trash and start all over. So these are great if you're working in this scale, folks. I recommend them. Other than that, I use very fine tweezers with pointy ends and an X-Acto knife. This is the Excel version of an X-Acto knife, and I like them because they have this flat sides on them and they don't roll off the workbench and head straight for your foot, which has been known to happen. But really, it's I tried other ways of, say, cutting holes for windows than using X-Acto knife, and I have yet to find anything that works as well. So that's what I do.
And then here we have some tools that you use to measure.
Yeah, these are my go-to measuring things. These are made by a company called Incra. Micromark sells them, and they're just generally around. Good woodworking places have them. There's the ruler, which if you use a 5,000th lead pencil, you can mark right using the ruler. Make little dots or little lines. It has both. So you can get very accurate measurements. The thing that looks like a square is in fact a square, where you can do the same thing. And that's very useful for, say, putting windows across a wall so that the distances are exact. Whereas if you have a ruler and you're moving it all the time, it's all too easy to have one be a little off. And when you're a little bit off in 1/44th, you're many inches off in real life, and it shows.
Yeah.
And the one at the top there is exactly the same thing for going around corners, which is handy if you're doing, say, stones on the corners of buildings so that they'll line up. And they're matte finish, which is nice too, because they don't glare in your eyes. Some rulers, you know, it's a light, you have a light right over you, which you usually do when you're working at a small scale. The glare is just awful. So anyway, those, I would not be without those either. And that's a close-up of the square.
And then this is working on, this is on your workbench.
Yep, it's on my workbench. I made one recently and I had so much fun, I thought he'd make another one. And another one is all there will ever be, because that window in the bottom was made in England by a company that has had the audacity to go out of business without telling me first. So I can't get any more of those unless I have them made, which I'm looking into, but I'm not optimistic.
Oh, wow. Sorry. And then here's the interior.
That's the interior. It's a little bit of a departure from my English houses. This looks a little more French, maybe. I would say.
And then,
so I tried to do French, and there it is on the workbench.
There it is on the workbench, and I can minimize this if you want to show it to the folks at home.
Oh, the actual one. Yeah, I have a minute. I made a little thingy to put it on so you could actually see it. Let's see. See how this works? There we go. It's unfortunately it's a little hard to see on. But I'm putting the stones on the first floor. And they are going to be individual stones. There's the chimney side. And the floor also inside is the flagstone floor, so those are individual too. And that's pretty much the way I do things like stone, because the slight irregularity that you get when you put things on one at a time by hand is what you'd actually see in a stone wall that had been sitting there for a few hundred years. So it helps it to look more real.
Yeah.
Once I get the flat plastic on, I texture it with gesso, and then I paint it. Usually 2 or 3 colors and some dry brushing. But it gives a nice effect.
Yeah. Nancy wants to know if you take commissions.
If I take commissions. I used to. As the years have gone by, I decided about 2 years ago I wasn't going to take any more commissions ever. Because time is limited. I find I can't work as many hours a day as I used to. Sometimes I can be persuaded, but generally speaking, I don't. But if you have something you really, really want, you can try. I guess I would say. If it's something that intrigues me, I might do it. Really, my bottom line came to be that life was too short to do it, to have other people's dreams, I guess. That's how I put it. And I was afraid I wouldn't have time to do all the things I wanted to do. But I try not to be too hard-nosed about things. The house with the cat and the dog was a recent commission. I couldn't say no to doing that. It was just too wonderful.
We're on ending, so I want to just squeeze in a few extra questions.
Sure.
Kate would like to know what keeps you inspired in coming back to miniatures day after day, year after year.
You know, that's, somebody asked me once why I even started doing it in the first place, and I'm not sure I could tell you. It is me, it's what I do. I mean, one of the things that keeps me coming back is there's always a new challenge. Or I'll see a building and I think, ooh, I'd like to do something like that. You know, I've got quite a file on my computer called my idea file of things where I've had that thought. I think I thought I'd burn out, and people do. And again, that's another reason I don't take many commissions, because sometimes it's fun and sometimes it isn't. And if it isn't, it can really get you down. As can making the same thing over and over and over again and worrying about whether things would sell or not and all that other stuff, which I kind of try to avoid. I get my best ideas in the shower in the morning, for whatever reason that might be.
Dustin has really question, what advice do you give to someone to get started in miniatures?
Well, I guess I would say just do it. There is so much out there now that wasn't there when I was starting out in terms of how-to books, videos, materials, stores that have classes. You might try going to a miniature show once we can do that again. And just look around and see what's there and talk to people. And most miniature shows have classes. You can try taking a class and see if you enjoy it. And there are classes in all sorts of things. The Chicago show that's coming up next year in April has zillions of classes, you know, making almost anything you could think of. And there's also the wonderful, wonderful Guild School in Castine every year, which is a whole week of hanging out with other miniatures people making miniatures. And there's nothing quite like it. It's the best week of the year, as I would say. But really, that's what I did. I just wanted to do it, so I did it. And you may be surprised, you know, that it's in your heart to do it. The first few things may not quite be what you wish they would be, but that's how you learn, you know. I hope my things I'm making today are a little advanced from what I did 30 years ago. But your hands learn, your brain learns. And it really, it's so much fun. And that's, if anything, that's what keeps me doing it. I just love it. It's almost as if I can't not do it, I would say. And anything you're having a problem with, you know, get in touch with a miniaturist. It's the most friendly group of people on earth. And if you know a miniaturist who does something, ask them if you're having a problem. You know, I've had people get in touch with me, and there's nothing I like more, really, than helping people get started in miniatures. Yeah, send me an email. And I can't tell you, I'll find somebody who will.
And I was going to say, I'm looking for resources. The Guild, igma.org, is a great place to go, and you can find information about the school at Castine that Al mentioned.
And there's also a Guild show, miniature show coming up in September. It's in Connecticut. All that information is on their webpage. And there will be classes there as well. Some good classes there. And, there's so much out there. You know, once you put your toe in the water, you'll find that will help you get started.
Well, one last thing that I was going to ask you. Many people have heard that our museum co-founder, Barbara Marshall, passed away this week. She was 97. And she and Mary Harris Francis founded the museum in 1982. And she was just a powerhouse of collecting and had just a really great relationship with a lot of artists. And I know she occupies a special place in your artist heart. And I wondered if you would share that with us.
Yeah, Barbara was my first customer. You know, I made a bunch of little houses and went off to a name convention in Philadelphia. And I was really not sure that people were going to get what I was doing. And I wasn't sure. In the beginning, I thought it was a dollhouse for your dollhouse and people were going to put them in the dollhouse. But Barbara came to the table and she had a way of looking at things so you knew she understood them. And not just understood them, but really, really loved them. You could just see it in her face. And just seeing her do that made me feel better. And then she bought 2 houses, you know. And I was just so happy and so relieved. And I did not know who she was then. You know, I did find out. I recently saw that she said, "I love art, but I love more people who do art." And that is Barbara. She was just an amazing person. And it's hard to even put into words. She helped so many people, including me, by encouraging us to do our best work. And not by just buying it, but by understanding and appreciating it, which is another kind of support that's every bit as important as money involved. So the things in the museum, I think she ordered the baby house, but the other things are she just bought from me at a show.
Mhm.
And I remember once, I think it was the time she bought the Georgian house, the Queensland house.
Mhm.
I said to her, you know, I hope, Barbara, that you know how important you are to so many of us, and how much, you know, your support and means to us. And I'm telling you, she was embarrassed because she was a very modest person, and it's just I miss seeing her. You know, I miss her calm, lovely presence at shows. Uh, I think the museum is a great tribute to Barbara and her taste and all the people, all the artists that she encouraged to do our very best work. And I still find myself sometimes making something and thinking Barbara would like this. You know, she's always sort of there. Part of what I do.
That is so lovely. I think that we will go ahead and end the program on that note. Nell, thank you so much for spending time with us and
It's a pleasure.
program with us. And we've just enjoyed the dickens out of it. And I want to thank everybody that joined us all over the world and all over the United States today with this program. We're so happy that you could be with us. If you didn't get your question answered, you can always send it to us on Facebook, and we'll find out from Nell and get you back. And this program has been recorded, and so it'll be up on our YouTube page later on. Thank you so much, and we will go ahead and sign off. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.